Hey guys, so I'm making a follow-up video because I don't think I really explained very well the problems that I have, not specifically with Kez, but just with how they balance in general. Obviously, I went on a longer rant. It was kind of half just off the cuff, like funny, whatever, who cares? But obviously, I have very specific things that I have a problem with in terms of how they're actually doing this with Kez specifically, but also the general way they're patching it. And so I wanted to elaborate on that a little bit, just in its own place, not having to rush through or get to the other heroes. So the real reason is that it shows something generally problematic, or there is some issue with how they're actually patching the game, their methodology or their system to go about patching the game. And really there's only two explanations that we can kind of derive from how they're doing this. And the first one is kind of what I alluded to, that they're using AI in some weird way. They're just kind of like running it through a system as an experiment to see what it generates and see if that works, and just kind of they're putting it in the game and then just seeing, okay, what does this actually do? Does this work? Does it make things all messed up? Does it just change stuff for no reason? I actually have a sneaking suspicion that that is actually what they're doing, because the other explanation would be that whoever is patching the game is just someone that doesn't play the game. They just don't really know what they're doing. They're kind of too scared to make any real changes, so they make kind of like superficial changes, or they just throw stuff at the wall just to see if it sticks, and they don't really care, and they're just kind of adjusting stuff just for the sake of adjusting it so that we get changes in the meta shifts, but they don't really have any reason for that. And those are the two like explanations. But really the core reason that it's a problem, both of those things, is that there isn't actually any proper goal or explanation or reasoning behind any of the changes being made. And Kez is the perfect example of why this is the case. Because if you just go through all of these changes, which I'm kind of going to do piece by piece here, we will see that you can't actually explain any of these changes with any kind of reasoning that starts from the ground up and leads to a change like this. You can always explain the change after the fact to say, okay, this is what the change will do. And in that sense, you're kind of guessing anyway. Like, here's the change. It will have this effect in the game. Sometimes you can kind of obviously say that straightforwardly. Sometimes you're just guessing, but you can always kind of go after the fact and say this is what will happen. But to say why it was implemented in the first place is a little bit of a different thing. There has to actually be some explanation, some kind of logical reasoning, some kind of this is what happened here, and now we're taking this action to change it. But that clearly is not the case at all. So we can just dive into it specifically with Kez. So here, base health regen increased, base attack speed increase. So this is a buff. This means this hero is weak. We need to make it stronger. That's pretty straightforward. That's pretty obvious. Then Shadowhawk the facet. There's a couple reasons to change a facet. One would be to nerf a very powerful facet so that the other one gets picked a little bit more. Maybe it's to nerf the hero overall in general. Maybe it's to buff a facet because it's not getting picked enough. So there's kind of different reasons to change the facets here. So regardless of the reasons to actually change the facet itself, there are going to be nerfs and buffs here in the same facet, which is the thing that I kind of want to point out. So first of all, no longer grants cooldown reduction, invis bonus crit decreased by a significant amount. So 2 nerfs right there. But now also increases buff duration by 1 second on each level for Raven's Veil. So that's a small buff. But really, we can see that this is just what you would say is cowardice or incompetence or something, where they're trying to nerf Shadowhawk facet, but then they're like, well, we don't want to nerf it too much, so let's just give it a little buff over here. So it's nerfing one thing, and then it's buffing a little bit to compensate on the other side. But really, that's just like, why are you doing that? There's no reason to do that at all, really, other than you're just too scared to nerf it completely. You don't want to over-nerf it, which, again, that's just cowardice. It's just saying you don't really know what you're doing, so you're just kind of throwing shit at the wall, kind of decreasing this one metric and increasing this other one because you don't want to mess with it too much, so you don't really know what you're doing or why you're doing it at all. So let's just kind of like look at the numbers of whatever the stats say, whatever it's spitting out, the statistics or anything like that, and then just we'll adjust it a little bit here and there. But that doesn't really do anything. That's not a good methodology, because you're just kind of arbitrarily doing things, not with an actual reason within the game itself. Just looking at the stats isn't enough. You actually have to know why the stats are that way. It's not that I'm saying you can never buff and nerf a hero. That's not true. It does make sense sometimes to buff and nerf a hero in the same patch. And Shadow Fiend is a perfect example with the Feast of Souls ability, especially 6 months to a year ago. 6 months to a year ago, many of you may remember, Shadow Fiend was broken. It was getting picked a ton. It was a right-click carry, basically. You could play it mid, but mainly it was a carry. And people were going for stats over Feast of Souls because Feast of Souls was so bad, it didn't really give you anything that you wanted, and you ended up spending souls to use it, which you didn't really like because it didn't give you enough to actually make that worth it. So people were just skipping it altogether. So in that next patch, the obvious idea would be, okay, let's nerf Shadow Fiend overall so we can nerf a bunch of the other things that it does. But then let's actually buff this one ability because it's so bad that even if we buff it a lot, they could like even buff it like crazy. It was basically the worst ability in the game, might even still be the worst ability in the game, even after some buffs. So even if we buff this ability a lot, that's fine because we're nerfing it overall. It needs a nerf overall. But because of the weird lopsided nature of the hero, this makes sense. But that's very rare. I was even going to be generous and say 10% of the time you could do that, but it might even be less. It might even be like 1-2% of the time, because it's rare that a hero's ability is so bad that they just don't even want to skill it. Like, that's kind of unique. And so that is a situation where a hero is so good at one thing that you want to nerf that, but there's another aspect of the hero that's just so awful that we can just buff this a little bit because that doesn't really make good design sense to just have an ability that isn't skilled at all, you know? So that can matter or be the case sometimes, but this is not one of those cases. This is not one of those where it makes sense for any reason to give a small buff while you're also nerfing. So that's the first case. Then we can see switch discipline. So Katana Discipline no longer increases damage. Katana Discipline now increases damage gained from agility by 20%. This can make sense in some cases where you're just saying, okay, we don't just give you flat damage, we're giving you agility-based damage. So basically, the reason why you would want to do this is switch it to more of just a stat-based hero, not just a raw damage thing. So that can make some sense in certain situations, and I'm not going to judge whether or not, I mean, I'm not a huge Kez player, so I'm not going to say whether or not that is something that is appropriate. That could be appropriate. There is a reasoning for why you would want to do that. The problem is, this kind of change is called into question when you have a lot of changes like the Shadowhawk one, or like the next one, which is Echo Slash, which says cooldown rescaled, and then bonus hero damage decreased from 25, 45, 65, 85 to 20, 40, 60, 80. So by basically 5 on all levels. So the cooldown is now 12 seconds instead of 14 seconds, so that's a buff, but then the damage is less. So at the end of the day, yeah, you might have something, like if you put it in a graph or something, like DPS, you might see whether that's a outright buff or nerf. But that is not a good way to patch the game, because just seeing whether or not the graph, like something with armor or magic resistance, or the way that even in this patch they do the healing stuff, like the healing amp and stuff like that. That might be a good way where you can look at the graph and you adjust stuff and the graph makes sense. This is not something that you can graph and get the actual outcome from a graph, because you are not going to be using this off cooldown. So basically how the skill is going to be used is not like a DPS meter, a graph. That's not how it works, because it's going to be something where, you know, in the laning stage, that cooldown matters a lot more because you have 1 point in it, you know what I mean? So that's a big deal. So in the early part of the lane, actually, if you just have 1 point in this, now it's from 20 to 21. So that's actually a nerf at the laning stage, but then later it's better. But then overall it's worse because the damage is worse. So this is just, it's just kind of convoluted and arbitrary. There's no actual reason here for why they did this. They're probably just looking at stats. It's just an AI thing, or it's just a graph thing. And then it's just like, okay, well, this makes it a little different. What is the real reason that we're doing this? We don't really understand the full potential of the hero. Yes, there are builds. Yes, they have kind of gotten their hands on it. It's been out for a little while, but we still don't fully understand the potential of the hero and what's actually good on the hero in a full way, like a fully fleshed out way. It's just not been a hero that has existed for long enough. We just haven't even got to the full ramifications of what this hero can do. And we've also nerfed it for so long now that people don't really play it anymore. So we don't actually know what is good on the hero. So what reasoning do we have for making the first level in the laning stage worse, but then it's better later, but it actually does less damage over? Like, this is just so convoluted that even for this change by itself to be in the game, would need to have a very long and elaborate kind of explanation of this hero is being played a lot, and it's really strong in the early part of the game, but this ability is worse later, and then we actually don't want it to do as much damage. Like, there's so many reasons that you would have to come up with to do this kind of change, but there isn't a reason. That's what I'm telling you. And so it's just arbitrary. Then next we go to Grappling Claw, and no longer has lifesteal is huge. So yeah, mana cost decrease, cooldown decrease, cast range decrease, which again, mana cost decrease, okay, great, that's a buff. Cooldown decrease, okay, great, that's a buff, at least early on. But now cast range decreased. Okay, well, why are we doing this? So it is an escape, that's great, but now it's a lower escape, but we can use it more often and it costs less mana. And now the move slow is not just 80, it's 70 to 100, so it's worse in one point, but better later. Slow now lasts a fixed amount of time instead of Kez's travel time, so, okay, I mean, I guess that's fine, but well, we're not going to focus too much on that. But the point is, again, we have buffs and nerfs, but then the main thing that this ability does is now gone. So, which is lifesteal, honestly. Obviously, it is a gap closer, but the lifesteal was huge. It is one of the fundamental parts of not only the ability, but also the hero in general. The fact that you're able to lifesteal with this ability is huge on the ability, to be honest, because you can get that lifesteal in there, as well as gap close, as well as escaping. That can be the difference between surviving and dying on the hero. It's huge. It's a fundamental part of the hero for anybody that plays Kez. So if they're removing this, then are we nerfing the hero overall? Because so far with everything that I've seen, yes, there's some buffs, but this so far now has nerfed the hero and fundamentally changed the way the hero works, despite the fact that it's bad right now, and it's not even being played to its full potential and only has been out for a few months. So why are we doing this? Do we need to do this? Is there some reason to do this? Well, no, it's just, we're just changing it for the sake of it, it seems like. And that is the problem, is changing things for the sake of changing them and not really for any reason behind the game. And so I think that also kind of gets to the root of the problem as well, is that now as we're seeing Dota getting older, and it seems like Valve cares less and less, it seems like they just kind of want to just let AI do it. Let something else do it. Let's not spend time caring. Yeah, this thing needs a nerf. Yeah, we'll just plug the numbers in, look at the stats, look at the win rates, and let it figure out what it wants to do. Say, oh, people are surviving too much on Grappling Claw with the lifesteal. Take it out. Who cares? Just get it out of there. Just change it for the sake of it. Oh, whatever. It doesn't even matter. Oh, we're not actually even thinking about why we're changing it. We're just going to change it so that it mixes it up so that you guys still play. Because whatever. Who cares, honestly? That's the feeling you get when you read these things. That's the justification. There is none. It's just a throw shit at the wall, change it because it's arbitrary. Don't actually think about why these things are being changed. Don't actually have any reasoning, because nobody could explain why this is going. Now, I would totally, if a Valve employee, someone, Ice Frog wants to come and explain every change, go ahead. But this is not possible. I'm telling you that right now, because it's just going to be a justification after the fact. There's never going to be a real impetus for any of these changes. I'm just telling you, there's so many and they're so arbitrary and they're so all over the place that it's almost impossible. And that's the real problem, is they're not one directional, they're not targeted, they're not specific enough or directed in the same direction enough to actually make any sense. It's just gobbledygook. It's just like all over the place. It's just nonsense, scramble. They just, basically that is another issue. That is another way to describe the issue, is they just put Kez in a pot and they took a spoon or they took a mixer and they just went and they just mixed it up a little bit. It's just like, okay, let's just mix it up. And I actually think that's good in some cases when it comes to like the map, like where trees are positioned and how the map plays out with camp locations. Just mixing it up sometimes, hey, that can be great. Now, sometimes I would say you want to move a camp, you want to remove an ancient, move it over here, do different things about it because of balance. And that you can have like actual reasons for doing that, and I think those are good most of the time. But if you do just want to mix up the map for the sake of mixing it up, hey, go ahead. Go ahead and do that, because that does change the game sometimes, just for the sake of changing the game for it to be fun. But not when it comes to this kind of stuff. This is not how you make a game fun. This is not because you're destroying heroes that people like to play, or you're changing fundamental things about them, and that's not good for the game in general. That just doesn't make any sense. And it also just makes it so now people are going to be caring less about the patches or the updates because it just feels arbitrary. And that's the other good word, I think, to describe it, is arbitrary. I think the point has already been made, but we can still look at this here. So Kazerai Katana now no longer applies health health regen reduction. Okay, I get that. They're kind of doing that in general with the, you know, whole theme of the patch. But still, that was a pretty big deal, again, with the whole idea, like this regen thing that's part of the patch, but not having the regen reduction is kind of huge. It's honestly pretty huge. Like, having that as part of the hero was a big deal. Damage per second rescaled. Okay, so it's increased. Duration rescaled. Okay, so now it's only 7 seconds. I kind of hate this. Again, it's weird. It's better early, but worse late. But again, here, which at this one, this is worse early. So what are we doing here? Are we buffing the laning stage? Are we nerfing the laning stage? Are we changing what, you know, points want to go in where? What are we actually doing and why? And this is another good tooltip here, which is total damage with duration increase. This is another thing. This is just the graph, right? We're just looking at the graph, guys. The total damage and duration is, but no, because that's not how it works. Like, you can't just think about it as a graph. You can in some instances, like I said, but not in every instance. You cannot do that. That's not how it works. It's more practical in its application because these things aren't being applied constantly. It's not being spammed. It's not a controlled environment. So here we go again. Now we have no lifesteal here, but we have lifesteal in here. We have a whole new ability being put in here. We have all this stuff happening on this ability. But again, for what purpose? I mean, I understand here we have the Grappling Claw as being now just a mobility spell, and we have this being given as another active component that just amps up damage. But why did we need to do this? That's the thing. There's no reason to do this. It's just to do it. I don't even care. Like, I don't care that this change happened here. It's not that this changed in and of itself. It's not that the thing itself is bad. Like, this ability is not bad. I'm not mad about that or anything. It's not even really a problem. Hey, you can put that in the game if you want. That's great. It's just the theme. Even if you took the lifesteal away from Grappling Claw and you put this new thing on here or whatever, right? That could be perfectly fine. You could totally do that as just like a part of changing the hero a little bit. But it's like the theme throughout is the problem, because it kind of shows you that when they do these kinds of things, it isn't for an actual reason. Isolated things can be okay, but then in the grand scheme of it, in the big picture, it's clearly just arbitrary. Then we have Raptor Dance again. I kind of already talked about this in the other video. This makes sense as a buff, okay? Strike count increased. Okay, that's great early on. Base damage rescaled. Okay, that's worse early on. Again, what are we doing here? But way better later. Max health as damage decreased by 1%. What are we doing here? But again, this speaks to looking at the graph. Again, tooltips, tooltips, tooltips. Stop it with the graphs. Stop it with the graphs. This is not how you balance the hero. And here's the problem. When you look at it as graphs, you're not taking into account the laning stage, the mid game, the farming transition out of the lane, what you're going to be doing in the mid lane or the carry as a carry. You're not taking into account any of that. The reason why that's important is because if you're not making changes based on specific things to make the laning stage worse or make it better or make the mid game worse or make it better or make the late game, if you're not thinking ahead, again, we're just throwing shit at the wall to make it different because the graph is just different now. What does that do? Well, that doesn't do anything specific that we're thinking about. It's just, let's make the graph, let's make the line do a different curve, right? Well, why? Oh, this parabola is different, or, this curve is now steeper or more shallow or whatever, just because. Not for a reason, just because. Well, it does technically buff it, right? Well, okay, but so what? Or this, even here, it's weaker early. It's like, why are we doing this? The problem is, you can't really tell actually if it's a buff or a nerf. Because yes, they have buffed some things, but they've also nerfed some other things, and maybe they're actually nerfing things that the hero needs to be good, and it's actually, at the end of the day, worse off. And that's the problem. That's actually a fundamental problem, is that when you start doing things like that, you actually might buff a hero unintentionally, and you might actually completely break the game in weird ways that makes the patch very annoying. And also for people that like the hero, or the hero's new, it's just like you're completely changing fundamental things about the hero in this weird way that's like, why are we doing this? And I think I can always come back to that. Why are we doing this on a new hero? Maybe if it was Bloodseeker, right? Maybe if it was Clinks, but it's not. This is a new hero where we haven't even really fully fulfilled the potential of it. And now we're completely mixing it up. Again, a lot of the abilities are still there. You still switch. Some of those fundamental things are still staying. But a lot of the stuff of what the actual ability does and how it's used is being changed. A change like this fundamentally changes, even though it seems small, it fundamentally changes how the how the hero works. Because now it is no longer getting this lifesteal on Grappling Claw. And that's a huge, just this change alone is huge for the hero in how it actually functions in a game. Talon Toss, again here, no longer has an AoE effect. Pretty big nerf, honestly. Now, how many times are you actually hitting multiple heroes? Well, it depends, but again, if this was needed, I would understand, but why is this happening, right? If we just remove this first line, it would make sense. But it doesn't make sense now because you made it not AoE. So let's just pretend, this is probably not true. I'm not the biggest Kez player, but I think for the most part, when you play against Kez, when you play with Kez, that AoE effect, not huge. Doesn't really happen more than 10% of the time. But let's just pretend that the AoE effect on this Talon Toss was huge. Because for whatever reason, let's just pretend it had a huge AoE. And you were silencing 3 heroes every time. Like you were silencing the guy you went on and the support. Because for whatever reason, the AoE is big enough that now the support can't save. And so that would be a situation, obviously we're talking hypothetical here, that would be a situation where simply removing this one thing, despite all these buffs, is actually in totality, overall, a nerf, right? If in that imaginary scenario, because the AoE effect is so important, it outweighs all of the other things that you could do to buff it, right? And so that happens oftentimes. You will even see that as a specific targeted strategy where you say, okay, well, this thing about this skill is so good that we need to remove it. But if we remove that thing, it just destroys the skill completely. So we need to make the skill a little bit better to compensate for how fundamental we are destroying the skill. And again, that's similar to the Shadow Fiend effect. Is like, if there's something so fundamental or so good that you need to nerf it, it makes sense sometimes to make other things that are bad better, or parts of the skill better, because you're just destroying something so good that it'll absolutely kill the ability or the hero in general. That can make sense in rare cases. In the fake scenario that I'm talking about, that can maybe make sense, but you could see how doing something like that, this one thing, could be overwhelmingly more of a nerf. And so that's why you can see this kind of stuff being like, well, do you actually know that this is a buff? Do you actually know? You don't know. I don't believe that you know. I don't believe that you think that, like, maybe you have a delusion to think you know, but part of me thinks that you're just throwing stuff at the wall. Okay, so now we see all of this in context, and can you even tell me, without playing it, what they even did? I mean, not really. Now, you can tell me specifics, obviously, like I said, with this and with other things like the not AoE, but you can't really tell me if this hero is better or worse. Now, again, that's not always a problem. You don't need to know what's going to happen every single time, especially when you're changing the map or this and that. Like, you're not going to know every time. And you don't need to just make blatant, obvious changes every time. Sometimes you are going to mix up a hero like a Bloodseeker, like a Clinks, like a Batrider. You're going to introduce new stuff and not know how it's going to play out. That's perfectly acceptable. But this is not one of those cases, because this hero was nerfed heavily, has not been played, is not popular, may still be good if you know what you're doing in certain scenarios and pubs, but let's let it play out. It's very new. People like it. Let's not change it fundamentally before we let, you know, the pros play it in pro games, and before we really flesh it out and say, okay, no, we buffed it a little bit too much now, because it definitely needs buffs. I mean, I think everyone could agree that Kez needs buffs. So we buffed it too much, we put it in captain's mode, it's breaking the game, let's change it, let's nerf it, we figured out actually what the good things are, now it's time to do that. Well, now is not that time. So this is just preemptive, it's changing for the sake of it, it makes no sense, we don't actually know if this is better or worse, in fact it could be way worse. You know, this part of the Kazerai Katana could be terrible. It could be absolutely terrible. I'm not claiming that it is, but let's just pretend that it is, because they didn't have the foresight to actually know what they were doing. And now you removed lifesteal here, you removed the AoE effect, you did some other things, you buffed it here and there, but maybe that's just not enough. You know, and I'm not saying it is. I have a feeling that this is going to make Kez better. I do have a feeling that is true. In fact, it might be a lot better. And that's another thing too. I don't want to emphasize the fact that it's not about whether or not Kez is good or bad. This hero could be broken now. It's just about the fact that there is clearly no rhyme or reason. There is no methodology. There is no actual thinking going in to any of these changes anymore. It is basically just AI, graphs, throwing shit at walls, experimentation, or just mixing it up for its own sake. The other big problem when you have this kind of methodology is that you end up doing things like changing Jug or changing Shadow Fiend in these ways that makes no sense. This is the problem, is with the Kez specific thing, it's a little bit weird. It's like almost overwhelming because there's so much there that's just like, who cares, whatever. Just let them throw shit at the wall. It changes the meta, that's fine. But it ends up kind of rearing its ugly head in cases like this, where this is the worst ability in the game, and they're like nerfing it overall, and then saying, well, we're giving it movement speed. It's like, what are you doing? And I think over time, as we've been seeing this happen more and more, you start realizing that, well, wait, why? What are we doing here? Like, what is the purpose of any of this, to be honest? Like, are we just fucking around for the sake of it? Are we just doing nonsense? Are we just being, experimented on? Are we just kind of like, what's going on here? And when you start feeling that way, it just feels, it makes everything feel a little bit more pointless. It makes everything feel like, okay, well, I'm just playing this game because it's a competitive game. I want to win. I want to have fun. I like how this stuff's going on. And then every, 3 to 6 months or a year, they just stick a spoon in it and just mix it up a little bit. They're just like, here, now, go away, everybody. Just have your fun with your stupid game. Like smacking you. Get away from me. Hands off. Go away. Like, I mixed it up. We got the AI to mix it up for you. Have fun again. Have more fun. Who cares? Like, and so then it becomes where then it's a game of, okay, well, the changes aren't actually meaningful. They don't actually do anything. It's not actually fun. It's just kind of mixing it up for the sake of it. And it's just kind of like, now I'm just in this weird rat race of playing a game that they don't really care about anymore. And it's just, that's the problem, is at the end of the day, I think it's just emblematic of the real problems that Dota has in general, where I feel like a game where the developers are passionate, they actually care about the game. It's a game that is fundamental to what the company is. They don't have this side, or it's not just a side project. These other things, it makes it so that they're not just like randomly experimenting. Now, there are benefits to that. They don't have to care about making as much money on the game, these kinds of things. They can just do wacky stuff. There are benefits where if you're a League of Legends or some other game, some other company where they just have to squeeze the money out of you, that there can be problems with that. So that gives Valve and their games some advantages, but then there's a lot of other disadvantages, and this is one of them, where it just becomes like a shit show. It just kind of gets all weird. But then even so, with the whole money thing, they still stole all the money when they canceled TI. They don't really run TI anymore. They don't care about it. They're just like, whatever, who cares? They just, there's a lot of weird stuff that's going on with Valve and Dota that it's just discouraging is all. And so I just don't like that where that game is going in that way. It's just kind of annoying for me. And so I don't like when I see, and we've seen more and more of this over the past few years of how they patch the game. And so, yeah, that's kind of the rant. That's the explanation for why. And at the end of the day, you can always come back and say, who really cares? And that is true. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day, but it's just kind of emblematic of the attitude of Valve and how they patch the game and the thought going into the game, and that there's, where 10 years ago it was very systematic. IceFrog had there was like a vision there. There was reasons. There was stuff. Now, and yes, there was a lot of stuff thrown at the wall. There was random stuff that was happening, but things were a lot more structured and made a lot more sense. And it felt like, it felt real in a way. And now it just doesn't feel like that at all. And that's kind of the issue. It just feels a lot more vague and nonsense and floaty and just garbage. And, okay, let's just expand the map. And, well, what did that really do to the meta? What did that do to the game in general? Was it good for the game? And that's the thing. I think that's at the fundamental problem. That's the issue, is what is the fundamental effect on the game, and is it good for the game? That's really the issue, is Dota is such a good game, has been such a good game, and is probably the best competitive game ever made in history in all of the world, like ever, period. And these changes are happening, not just to heroes, but to the game in general, like expansion of the map, implementation of neutral items, and all these other things, facets, universal heroes. Kez, in this specific instance, is just a small microcosm of the bigger picture of, are any of these things actually good? You implement the change, and then you go back and you look at it and you say, did this do what we wanted it to do? Did it do anything to help the game? Did it make it any better? And my argument is pretty much that over the course of the past 5, 6, 7, 8 years, most of these changes have been a net negative to the game. And it's just kind of like decreasing the strategic value of the game and how much thought goes into it, and just kind of like generalizing it, softening it, mashing everything down, where now 4 positions are playing basically carry. Everyone is a carry. Again, I get it if you don't want that 5 position with brown boots, stick, you know, and wards or whatever at 40 minutes. I get that. I can get that to some extent. We can adjust things a little bit here and there. But when you start doing all this stuff, you start removing what made the game great, and you start making it a different thing. And right now, and even more in the future, Dota is going to be, and already is, a different thing than what it was a while ago, 10 years ago. And I will say, sometimes that's great. I think couriers have been a great thing, the way they've changed couriers. I even think, to some extent, the way they deal with wards has been probably better. There are quality of life changes that were holdovers from the Warcraft 3 days that we've gotten rid of. Those things are all good. And those things, for the most part, are just kind of common sense things that we would all want to change, and that makes sense. But that is probably 10% or even less of what has actually changed in the game with big impact, like the expansion of the map and all these things. Like a great change, I think, was 2 Roche pits. And where it is now is perfect. But people were talking about that 10 years ago, and it took them this long. And so it's just one of those things that I think eventually, as this happens, there is, and this is just a random theory or an idea, but there's room for Dota as a game from 10 to 15 years ago to be made again and to come back, because I think people would actually appreciate that game more as it was back then, and realize how, with the quality of life changes implemented, how good that game actually was, and how awesome that is compared to what it is now. Which I think what it is now is, there's good and bad things about it, certainly, but it is not the same game, and it is not nearly as, I guess I would say, strategic and as fundamentally deep and interesting as the game that it was 10 years ago, because of all these things. Because we have 4 carries and 1 support / carry that is a 5 position that actually does get like a billion items anyway. And the map is just huge now. And the laning stage doesn't matter at all anymore, because high ground is just insane to defend, and you can always get your farm on the map no matter what. There's infinity glyphs, like all these weird things, all the power creep, which is going to happen, I get. But so that's kind of the analysis of Kez specifically, and what it means for the game, and all the specifics going into it in a more detailed and elaborate and not ranty necessarily way that I hope makes some sense. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, if you understood what I was saying, if you agree, disagree, if you think something should be changed up. I really would be interested to see, like, if you just take the game where it is now, or where it's going in the next 5 years, and you just like re-release a more user-friendly, of course, Dota of 2014 or 15, how that would look. Maybe even like the patch when they release 7.0 or something, like something around there or whatever. Like, give the talents, you know, you can give some other things like talents and stuff like that, but just one of like a patch like that, like talents, backpacks, that kind of stuff. But just removing all the other clutter, all the other garbage, and just saying, okay, this is what this is now. Let's compare these two. I think that old Dota game would be more popular. Like, obviously without all of the extra, you know, the momentum and the Valve name, all these things that make this current Dota, as we see, to Dota 2 popular. But if you just compared 1-to-1 on its merits, I think that old game is better. And that's kind of the problem that I'm having. And that's kind of, I guess, the base problem with the game in general, specifically, and also Valve's treatment of the game and how they're kind of growing the game. And I think that's the overall issue. Let me know if you agree or disagree with that, what you think in general. But hopefully this made a lot more sense, and I was able to break this down and not just make kind of a vague statements, a vague rant, basically, and make more specific and coherent statements or explanations of why I think this is a problem. So, as always, guys, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.